Welcome back to the foundry. Today's little project finds us back on the old Dodge truck in my quest to make this a reliable, roadworthy rig. Now today is TPS Tuesday here at the foundry. Of course, TPS stands for throttle position sensor, and that's what we're going to be replacing today. So I'll give you some quick info on how I wound up in this position. So if you watched any of my other videos on this truck, you know I just recently purchased it. And the previous owner, right before I got it, changed out the throttle position sensor, which is, you take this cover off, there's a bell crank assembly under there where all your cables run, your throttle cable, your TV cable, and your cruise control cable. On the back side of that bracket is the throttle position sensor. I think Cummins calls it an APPS, which I believe stands for accelerator pedal position sensor. Now, personally, it'll always be a TPS to me, because you go to somebody and you say, oh, you know, give me an APPS. They're not going to know what you're talking about, but everybody knows what a TPS is, or everyone should know. So anyway, they go out, you know, over time. I had the same issue with my 7.3 liter Power Stroke Ford. It's just something that happens on these old trucks. Sensors fail, but what you need to do when this occurs is buy an OEM or equivalent sensor. A lot of people will jump on Amazon like the previous owner did and buy the cheapest one they can find, and you end up in the position that I'm in now, where I'm having strange drivability problems out of it. And that can all be avoided with a good quality OEM sensor. Now, OEM sensors are very expensive, so that's why a lot of people opt for the eBay, Amazon stuff that comes from who knows where, and it's like 30 bucks. An OEM sensor for this truck is about $400. So I can see why they did it, but it's not a good idea. I mean, there's places in life where you can compromise and get away with it. This is not one of them. So the problem I'm having is every once in a while I'll crank this rig up and it will launch itself into orbit. The throttle goes wide open and you got to shut it down quick before you blow something up. That is very not good on a diesel, to do that cold especially. So did some research and figured out, well, it could be the throttle position sensor. And the fact that he just replaced it with a cheap import one, you know, I just instantly thought, okay, it's got to be the TPS. So I did a little checking on my rig and determined that the TPS they installed was never even adjusted. If you don't know this, a TPS is not just plug and play. You actually have to hook it up, adjust the voltage, then calibrate the computer to that voltage. And that adjustment was never made. So I'm really surprised the computer eventually learned it, but another problem I was having was a sluggish accelerator pedal and a extremely delayed first to second shift. So what I did was adjust the TPS to the proper voltage and then calibrate it, and it worked great. But the next morning I jumped in the truck and I had the sluggish throttle pedal again. The computer had lost the calibration to the TPS. So I'm not going to keep going through this with this cheap sensor, so I went and ordered an appropriate sensor for this truck. So what I came up with, after doing a lot of research on a lot of different forums and groups, there's a guy that sells, I don't know if it's aftermarket or if he sources these from Cummins supplier, where Cummins gets theirs, but it's a very high quality TPS, and you'll notice it looks different than the factory style. This is a cheap knockoff from Amazon that costs about $30 or $40, and it'll give you fits and problems like what I'm having. These have really good reviews with a lot of you know, very knowledgeable mechanics on the forums. And what I like about it is it has this pigtail that will make it easier for us to do our voltage adjustment, and I'll show you that here in a bit when we put it on. As you can see, the factory one doesn't have a pigtail, it just plugs right in, and you can't access that plug for where it's mounted when you go to make your adjustment. It makes it a pain in the neck. You'll also notice the factory style has slotted holes for your adjustment. This one does not. They're fixed holes, so you make your TPS adjustment at the bell crank. And it's really easy, or should be. We're going to find out. But this sensor is actually made for a Cummins diesel on a 18-wheeler type rig, and this pigtail actually is an adapter. You see, this is the plug for the 18-wheeler. This is the plug for the Dodge truck. So he put this pigtail in here, and it's high-quality components. It's a Delphi plug here. It's a Deutsch plug here. You know, it's good stuff. But he's been making these for, I don't know, 15 years, and really good reviews. This one was about $195 versus the $30 one, but from everything I've read, it's well worth it. It comes with very good instructions, so this is what I went with, and we're going to get started getting this thing installed. Anyone who is moderately competent, has a few basic hand tools and a multimeter, can do this repair on your truck. It's not that difficult. Just follow the instructions if you've never done it before to get your adjustments and your calibration right. It doesn't take too terribly long. It's not a big deal. So hopefully this will go real smooth, and I'll just kind of show you how I'm doing it. First thing I'm going to do is unhook the batteries, take this cover off, and then take the bell crank assembly off of this bracket. Batteries are disconnected. I'm going to pop this cover off. Mine is missing one of these, so it's really easy to get it on and off. This is the bell crank assembly for your throttle, and there are 6 10mm bolts. I'm going to buzz them out and lay this bracket over, and it'll expose the TPS where we can get to it. All right, I got my bolts out. Roll it over, and there is the TPS. This it's hard to hold and do, but this sensor right here, electrical plug comes in the bottom of it, and it's got 2 Torx screws to hold it on. I'm just going to unhook the wire and unbolt the Torx screws, and it slides off. And that's what it looks like under the bell crank assembly. There's that flat there. That's what you install the TPS on. You line that flat with that flat and so forth, and we'll get into that here in a minute. The new sensor has the same type of flat spot on there to mount to. You match those up, slide it on, run down your screws, and before you tighten them, turn the TPS clockwise until it butts up against the screws, then tighten it down. Now, you do not do it that way with a factory TPS, a factory style sensor, because the screw holes on the factory style are slotted for adjustment. This one's not slotted. All I'm doing is taking the slack out of it. We're going to do our adjustment at the bell crank. All right, here we are with the new sensor installed, and I'm about to bolt this bracket back onto this bracket. And the reason I'm not showing me actually putting the bolts in and doing the work is because it's really hard for me to hold the camera and work one-handed. I don't really have a way with my tripod to get it to where you can actually see anything. So, but you can see, you know, step by step what I'm actually doing. But that's going to bolt up here. Our pigtail is hanging down there. Our plug is hanging out down there. And that's going to be very handy, and I'll show you why here in a second. All right, we got our bell crank assembly bolted back on. And while we're talking about bolts, it's important, I should have noted this before, the 2 Torx head screws that hold that TPS on, if it's never been off before, from the factory, it has Loctite on the threads, so be darn sure you don't round those off, or else you'll have to take them off with a pair of vice grips. The same applies to the bell crank screw, the idle adjustment screw. That's what a lot of people call it, even though that's not really what this is on a diesel. But this screw has Loctite on it. It has never been touched on this truck, so I'm going to take a little propane torch and gently heat that to soften the Loctite so I can make my voltage adjustment. Now, for the voltage adjustment, this is the factory plug on the factory wire harness on the truck. This is the plug on the sensor I just bought. I'm going to install a paper clip on the appropriate wire. It's wire number 3 on the back of this plug, which I believe to be that green one right there. On the factory plug, it is. You can go in from either way. On the factory plug, I believe it's the, see if we can see here. I believe it's the black with the blue tracer. Look at your directions before you take my word for it. I got to look at them one more time to make sure I'm on the right wire. But all I'm going to do, and the lighting's bad and I'm shaking the camera, just bear with me. I'm going to slide a paper clip in with this wire into the plug to make contact so I can hang my multimeter on it and read the voltage. And then once I have my voltmeter hooked up and I can see what's going on, then I'll make my adjustment to the bell crank screw to get the proper voltage. And what we're going to be measuring out of our new sensor is the output voltage. Because all a throttle position sensor is a potentiometer. You have a reference voltage that comes in. It's usually like anywhere, it depends on the vehicle, 3 to 5 volts usually, that goes into it. It's constant voltage. As you turn the throttle, it increases the voltage the computer sees. So at closed throttle, it'll be in tenths of a volt because the throttle's closed. As you open the throttle, the further you open it, the closer your output voltage will get to your reference voltage. So if my reference voltage is, 4 volts, at closed throttle, I'll be at like 0.5 volts. But as I move it toward wide open throttle, I'll get closer and closer. The output voltage will get closer and closer to match the reference voltage of 4 volts. So, it's kind of a muddled explanation, but that's basically how the sensor works. It sends a voltage signal out of the sensor to the computer, let the computer know where the throttle is. The computer then sends the signal to the injector pump, and that's what controls your RPM on your engine. Diesels don't have a butterfly valve like a throttle body like a gas-powered engine would have. Your throttle cable on a gasoline engine would go to a throttle body where there's a butterfly valve that controls the airflow to the engine. Diesels don't have any of that. This is the intake port. It's just wide open. There's no throttle body. There's no butterfly valve. It controls engine RPM directly by fuel that the injector pump puts out. So I opted to put the paper clip in on the factory harness side just because it's easier to get to, and it is the light blue wire with a black tracer. Corresponds to pin number 3, which is the green wire on the TPS side. So now I'm going to hook my batteries back up, turn the key to the on position, and I should be seeing about 0.5 or 0.6 volts coming out of the TPS. So the way this works is on these throttle position sensors, so you have an idle on voltage and it's a dead range on that sensor, which means you can move the sensor wherever you want and the voltage doesn't change. That's your idle zone. That tells the computer that the engine is idling. When that voltage begins to change, that's the idle off zone of your voltage, and the computer knows that you're now throttling. So what you want to do is adjust that sensor right at the crest of the dead spot, right before it starts to move the voltage. That way you don't have any slack in your throttle pedal. When you gas on it, there's no delay, for the computer seeing that you're throttling. So that's what we're going to do here. Okay, I have my positive lead hooked to the paper clip. I've got my negative lead hooked to the negative terminal on the battery. And where that sensor ends up at closed throttle before adjustment is about 0.78 volts. So I'm about to get my little torch and carefully heat that screw to where it'll melt the Loctite, and then I'm going to adjust it and see where I need to go to where I explained before. Well, that was easy. It's freed up. Just took a little bit of heat. So mine was just, mine actually has to be backed off a little bit. I don't know if the camera's showing those numbers, but I'm at 0.75, so I'm going to back off. There's 4, 3, 0.68, 0.67. So 0.67 seems to be the dead spot. So I'm having trouble keeping my positive lead on that paper clip because I really need both hands here. So 0.67 is the dead spot. I'm going to bump it up till it starts to move again. All right, there's 0.6, yep. And then I'm going to back it off about a half a turn, I believe. There's 0.67. Okay. Now we're going to test it. I'm going to open the throttle. Let me grab the camera just in case you're not able to see the numbers on the multimeter. So you'll be able to watch as I'm going to open the throttle. And you see it slowly go up. Up and up and up. And it should end up about 3 point something. 3.8 or something like that. At wide open throttle. So there's wide open throttle, 3.83. Slowly back down to closed throttle. We should be at 0.67-ish. There's 0.67. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is unhook this and turn the key off, turn the key back on, and calibrate it. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So it bears noting real quick, if you're installing an OEM or a factory style sensor, you don't really adjust it like this. It'll come with instructions to tell you where you need to have it adjusted at closed throttle, or it'll be stamped on the back of the sensor. But here's a little unknown fact. You do not adjust your voltage exactly to what is stamped on the back of the sensor. That is the crest point where the computer goes from on idle to off idle throttle. You don't want to adjust your idle voltage at the off idle throttle number. You want to adjust it 0.2 of a volt below that. So for example, if your sensor has 0.5 volts stamped on the back of it, you do not adjust it to 0.5 volts. You adjust it to 0.48 volts. That's something a lot of people don't know. It's a mistake that, you know, a lot of people make. I only learned it through thorough research. I'm not a Cummins guy. I'm just telling you what I've learned. And you know, a guy told me one time, a smart man learns from his mistakes, but a wise man learns from the mistakes of others. So that's what I try to do. But you know, we'll see how this all works out. Now that we have the new APPS/TPS, whatever you want to call it, installed and adjusted, the next thing we have to do is calibrate the computer for the new sensor's voltage. The way you do that, shut the door so we don't have to listen to that beep. So the way you do that, you turn the key to the on position, and I usually wait for all the lights and gadgetry to go through its little routine, and I've got to where my wait to start light is reversed to what it's supposed to be. That's a whole nother thing. But anyway, so now that the key's on, it's dark in here so you can't see anything, but I'm going to slowly push the throttle pedal all the way to the floor, and I'm there. Okay, now I'm going to slowly release it all the way till my foot is off of it. Then I'm going to turn the key off, and the sensor should be calibrated, or the computer should be calibrated to the new sensor. That's how the computer learns that new, because my old sensor I think was adjusted at 0.5 volts, is where it was supposed to be adjusted. This one is 0.67 according to what we just discovered. So the computer needs to be calibrated to that 0.67 is where it starts to throttle, to go off idle into throttle. So anything below that is idle. So let's crank it up and see if I have throttle response. If I do, we should be good. We'll take it for a little test drive. See, I gotta wait for that wait to start light to come on. Now I can start it. See, it's weird. All right, well, it didn't spin off into orbit like it did with the old sensor. You'd crank it up and it'd go up to rev limiter. Throttle seems to be right where it needs to be. Let's take this thing for a test drive. We'll know pretty quick if the calibration took, because if it didn't, I'll have a sluggish throttle response. Oh, we got good throttle response. And it should shift properly. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You know, I think it picked up a little bit of power. It's kind of snappy from where it was before. I'm digging that. I am digging it. It's especially when you first touch the pedal, it's so much more responsive. There is literally no delay. And I don't know if that's because, you know, I adjusted it so close, or if it's just because the sensor is such higher quality. But this sucker is getting it. Alright, well, let's head back to the foundry, and I'm going to call this a successful repair. So anyway, time will tell, but as of right now, I'm calling it fixed. And so the guy I got the parts from, I don't know him, never met him, never talked to him. You know, obviously, if you look at the size of my channel, I'm not sponsored by anybody. This is just what I went with personally, and I had a good experience. It was $195, which is about half of what an OEM cost. And I ordered it on a Friday and I received it on a Monday. So shipping was light speed. Very pleased with it. I'll drop a link to where I bought it in the video description. And there was another forum where I found out about this guy just by doing a Google search. Can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. There's a lot of good info on that forum. So I'll drop some of that, maybe some links to that in the video description as well. So yeah, another project down, and or completed, I should say. And I'm gonna get back to the rest of what I got to do today. So if you got anything from this, do me a favor, take the like button to Pound Town, and I'll see you in the next one. Oh, there's a new Dollar General out here. Imagine that. This thing runs so much better. I thought it ran really good before, just because I'd never experienced what it was supposed to run like. But yeah, this is great. Very happy with it. In fact, I mean, I'm in love. I can't help it. I'm in love. So there's that.